Welcome to Healing the Spirit, a space where we awaken our creativity, deepen our connections, and remember who we are through the lens of astrology, archetypes, and art making. I'm your host, Jonathan Coe. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Healing the Spirit, and thank you for being here. In this episode, I'd like to share about an offering that I'm currently creating and launching called Creative Exorcism. I mentioned this course briefly in the last episode, and in this episode, I want to go deeper into why I created this offering, the kind of person that I had in mind when I was designing the course, and how I'm structuring the course. This round of Creative Exorcism will begin officially on Monday, July 6th, and it'll run until Friday, September 4th, 2026. So it's about 9 weeks, about 60 days. And if you're interested, I encourage you to join the waitlist so you can receive the code for an early bird discount, which is valid until Monday, June 29th. All right, so first and foremost, what is Creative Exorcism? And why did I create it? I'll read you the mission statement for this course. Creative Exorcism is a 9-week course to awaken your inner creative beast. The purpose of Creative Exorcism is to walk creative mystics through the alchemical process of 1. Clearing inertia, resistance, and fear of approaching the creative process, also known as clearing the ghosts of other people's opinions, past failures, and collective what-ifs from our psychic attic. Number 2, meeting and befriending their inner creative beast. And number 3, building authentic, organic momentum with their art practice. So I have a really cool story about how the title Creative Exorcism came to me. It was right after I woke up from this dream where I found myself in a haunted mansion. It was one of those old houses with creaky floors, there were cobwebs everywhere, and there was this strange, musty smell wafting through the entire mansion. And in this dream, I was wandering from room to room, and I was calling out my own name. I was shouting out, "Jonathan, Jonathan." I remember starting in the living room, and in response to me calling out my own name, I heard this other voice that's not mine. And this voice was saying, "What's the point of writing songs if you can't make money doing it? Nobody cares what you do anyway. You'll die completely broke. You'll die completely alone," which is really intense, right? But for some reason, I remember vividly that this version of me walking through this mansion didn't register it as my own. Like, it was basically just shrugging this off, and I just kept calling my own name while this voice was happening in the background. And then I walked into the bedroom and I continued shouting my own name, and I saw this little boy in the corner. He was clearly sobbing, so I sat next to him, and I could see that certain parts of him were turning gray and translucent, kind of like, when you see old TV sets glitching. That's kind of how he looked like. And I put my arm around his shoulders and I asked, "Why are you crying?" And he said, "My friends are making fun of me. My teachers don't think I'm talented. I should just stop drawing." And then I thought, interesting. And then I saw myself walking to the kitchen, and I was continuing to shout my own name. And this time, in response in the kitchen, there was a sigh. And then I heard another voice without a body saying, "Never mind, this is too hard." And then I woke up from the dream. Now, mind you, this dream came to me a few years ago, and I had this dream a few months basically after I internally decided that I was kind of done trying to be an artist. I decided it was too hard. My healing work was doing well. I was working with incredible clients and students, and I was finally teaching. And at that time, I was also busy with my day job as a data scientist. I haven't felt super inspired to make my art. And as some of you may know, the reason why I got into the healing arts in the first place was because I was kind of burnt out by this process of chasing my dream of creating art for a living. And when I woke up, I had this real epiphany. I realized I had been carrying this story about how hard it is for me to make my art, to be an artist, to be appreciated doing the thing I love the most, to be loved expressing my true self. And I've been living my whole life dedicated to the story, essentially. I was so subscribed to the story. And for some strange reason, the act of a few months ago, prior to the stream, having mentally told myself that I was done chasing the stream, that I was not interested in it anymore, and I'm just going to live my life, gave me this kind of weird neutrality. Like I was walking around the house, and clearly when I look back at the dream, I realized, oh yeah, those voices were very familiar to me. These are messages that I've heard my inner critic saying over and over again throughout my life, but it almost seems like it didn't even occur to me that that was my own internal voice, which was so cool because I realized I didn't have to carry this around. You know, when I looked at these stories, the truth is that they're not really mine. They were amalgamations of stories that my ancestors had about their creativity. They were stories that I was carrying in my psychic field from environments I grew up within. These were stories that became calcified because I had been told at some point that I needed to grow up, that I needed to be an adult, that I needed to, stop making my art because that was childish. And if I wanted to do it as an adult, if I wanted to make art as an adult, I needed to pass a certain standard of, quote, performance, right? And usually what people meant by that is that you have to make a certain amount of money as an artist. You need to get people's approval. You need to meet certain standards. You need to have a plan, right? And none of that was entirely wrong because we do have to survive within these systems. But I had this huge realization of, wow, none of that is mine. None of that was the reason why I started creating. None of that was the truth of my soul. None of that was my spirit. And I also had this profound realization that if I was able to maintain that level of emotional distance, neutrality towards those stories in my sleep, then I could also maintain the same level of neutrality when I'm awake, technically, right? And this was, again, kind of surprising to me because I have been an energy worker for years. And this is actually what I help people do, right, in sessions. I help people find some level of distance from these stories that they have been telling themselves, these limiting beliefs, the trauma imprints, so that they can actually take steps towards what they wanted to do through more deeply and more fully embracing the version of themselves that they know themselves to be. And I realized in that moment, wow, I really hadn't cleared out all these stories, all these energetic crap from my own energy, haven't I? And I've been in my own healing journey for years at this point, right? I'm even a quote professional, And I heard myself saying, we need a creative exorcism. And I thought that phrase was so good. I thought it was so accurate because that's exactly what it's like to live with these voices. That's exactly what it's like to live with these energies in your personal space. That's not yours, right? It's like living in a house with ghosts and you can't even find yourself because wherever you go, these ghosts are following you around. They're messing with your TV. They're eating your dinners. They're playing with your microwave, whatever it is that ghosts do, right? So I started using the tools and the principles I learned as an intuitive, as an energy worker. These are tools I use with people when they're coming to me with something that they're struggling with. And I start really using these tools not just in meditation, right? Not just in these long 30-minute trance energy work that I do for myself, but I really do it and I apply it to real life. I really started cleaning my psychic attic when it comes to my creative work. If you've been following my work, this personal work was actually what led me to releasing this offering called the Creative Spirit Reading, which was a one-on-one offering that some of you signed up for last year in 2025. And throughout all of 2025, I kept developing this work in my own personal practice. It led me to working more intimately with this modality called vocal de-armoring with Marissa Michelson. I'm currently finishing up the teacher training program for this work, and also, it helped me deepen my commitment to help people heal their creative trauma through my personal practice as a spiritual guide. So, not only have I been applying this to myself, I've also been applying it with my clients and my students. And the framework is really quite simple, but also very profound. I found that as a result, this process clears the path in my life. It removes the structures, the relationships, and most importantly, all these internal patterns and these postures that block your natural creative flow. It creates space for what is truly in alignment with your creative spirit. And I was actually right on the verge of sharing this offering in the fall last year, around October, before I got news that I was let go from my day job. And that was a shock to me, but also some part of me knew it was coming, and I had a real strong sense that it came because I've been doing this work. I've been doing this creative exorcism, and I could tell when I was told that I was, let go from the job, that the team that I was working with at the time was restructuring. I knew that I was ready. I was ready to fully treat my creative practice, to put it at the center of my life, and to do my healing work and share it with a larger audience. And I realized that this process was kind of intense, and it kind of freaked me out, to be honest, because I didn't think it was going to work that well. So I needed to take a little bit of space away from it, and I needed to have a little bit of extra perspective. But recently, I was nudged by one of my mentors, Pilar Lesko, to really finally bring this framework down into a course that I know quite a few of you will benefit from. So here we are. Creative Exorcism is finally here. So who is this course for? I really designed this course with creative mystics in mind. And let me explain a little bit about what I mean when I said creative mystics. These are people who have perhaps felt too mystical, too spiritual for the conventional artistic and creative communities. And these people also perhaps have felt too rebellious, too enthusiastic to draw outside the lines for spiritual communities. To me, the creative mystic is a really special breed because our path is really different from the pure creative and the pure mystic. The pure creative is here to hone their craft, to translate their creative visions and their aspirations into works of art that they can share with others. I've met a bunch of pure creatives in my life, especially when I was studying classical piano. And these people are really disciplined and they're very focused. They're not consciously that interested in having a mystical experience where they become one with the divine through their art. They're not really interested in personal development. They're not really interested in looking within themselves and unraveling deep patterns that maybe they've inherited from their ancestors or from multiple different lifetimes. And the paradox is that these people are perfectly capable of creating sublime, exquisite works of art. They're perfectly capable of delivering really incredible performances. But when you ask them what was going on behind the scenes, they'll just tell you, this is what I did, technically. This is this really simple, basic techniques that I've honed over my lifetime, and it works so well. Just try it, right? Keep going. These people are really crafts people at their heart, and they're so good at their craft, but they're not super interested in kind of going deeper into the existential heart of art, really. And then we have the pure mystics, right, on the other end of the spectrum. The pure mystics are people who are uninterested in creatively expressing themselves. They're not interested in putting their own spin on their mystical studies. They're really just here to have that experience of union with the divine. They don't care how it looks at all. Their desire is to create a life where they can become such a direct vessel for spiritual energies. And as long as they can allow that to move through them, as long as they can experience that pure union with the divine and maybe perhaps benefit a few people along the way, they're good. They're good to go. They're happy with that. Now, creative mystics are a unique breed because I could almost always smell them from a million miles away in spiritual spaces. They're usually a little bit emo. They're a little bit angsty. They bring a kind of edge to spiritual spaces. They're not satisfied with simple answers. They're not satisfied with being told, here's how you heal this pattern, because some part of them knows that they're here to create something out of that pain. Some part of them recognizes that this pain has a function, and they appreciate the intensity of that pain because they know they could make art out of it. I wrote about this in my newsletter recently, where I found in being around fellow healers that many of them are actually closeted artists. Many of the healers I know, actually, when you ask them, what did you want to be when you were growing up as a child? They would often say, oh, I wanted to be a performer. I wanted to be a painter. I wanted to be a dancer. I wanted to be a filmmaker. I wanted to write my own novels. And what I inevitably found is that somewhere along the way, this impulse, this desire to make art, it got thwarted. Maybe they had parents who didn't know how to support them. Maybe the environment they grew up in, their school, or the adults in their social circles, maybe they didn't value artistic expressions. Maybe there was a traumatic event like the death of a parent or bullying that made artistic explorations feel threatening or dangerous or at least superfluous in some ways. And what I've noticed in working with a bunch of private clients that I would definitely consider creative mystics is that this is around a time where they develop excess empathy. They develop this personality, this ego that is highly attuned to other people. And energetically, they started absorbing other people's energy so intensely. And one reason for this was perhaps to stay safe, but also they were very aware of the pain that other people carried in their lives. They were aware that the adults around them had all this pain that they didn't know what to do about. And so these creative mystics got rewarded for being helpful, for being empathetic, for taking on everybody else's feelings, for knowing how to respond in a way that instantly made people feel better. And over time, they developed this identity as a healer, as someone who is wise, as someone who helps other people feel better. And while this is such a beautiful gift and such a beautiful talent, and I will never in a million years tell my creative mystics clients and students to change themselves, what I also know from having deep, real conversations with them is that they were confused because they spend their lives helping everybody, but somehow they're still not fulfilled. There is a very strong programming that happens that we were taught in the collective that if you help people, if you devote your life to service, you will be happy, you will be fulfilled. And in practice, that hasn't been true for these creative mystics. They still feel like there's something they want to do, there's something they need to do. And ultimately, they needed to learn the lesson that going around trying to heal everybody in order to compensate for whoever it was in their childhood that they weren't able to heal. Maybe that was their parents or their teachers or their grandparents or a sibling figure. Trying to heal these people are not actually going to fulfill them. That's not it. They've spent their entire lives, decades sometimes, being in service to other people. And they couldn't feel that satisfaction that supposedly you were supposed to feel when you step into full service. And this feeling, this gnawing feeling, to me is pointing to something so important. And it's crucial not to override this. It's crucial not to ignore this, because what they really want deep down is to reclaim their creative expressions. That despite all of this business, or maybe more accurately, busyness of helping everybody around them all the time, what they truly want to do is to explore who they are as an artist, to explore who they are as a creative. And so creative mystics walk a really unique path. They needed to learn how to use all these healing tools and all these natural abilities to heal other people in order to heal themselves, to turn that power inwards, and to use the power of their intention to heal their own vessel, to finally learn how to step into their full power as a creative being, and to express a deep part of them, a deep part of who they've always been as part of their service into the world, without primarily thinking, how am I going to express myself so that I can be useful for other people? You know what I mean? Like, there is a way in which they need to step into the spontaneity of their authentic expressions. And having a creative modality for this is so essential. It could be as simple as writing one poem a day. It could be as simple as doodling in their sketchbook. But they need to do something in order to express that deep, authentic part of them. And the reason why I'm so passionate about helping fellow creative mystics make their art, especially the ones that resonate with being a healer or a helper, is because I've spent a significant portion of my life learning to develop a healthy relationship with discipline, with consistency, and then to apply that to my creative work. This is so important because the truth of the matter is, if you want to feel creatively fulfilled, if you want to feel like an artist, you have to make art. There's no way around it. Nothing else is going to make you feel fulfilled. However, how you are when you make art, the state of being that you approach art making with, is extremely important. And so much of traditional art education skip this part altogether. Instead, the focus is on the product, right? The focus when you take a painting class is, how do you make the best painting? The focus in a lot of music education is, how do you become the best musician you can be? And I think that's great, right? And but as a result, especially for the creative mystics who are also curious and craving that union experience, that focus towards, how do I become the best artist and how do I meet these standards, these creative, these artistic standards, that approach completely misses the point of making art in the first place. Many creative mystics, they want to make art because they crave that sense of deep flow that they can access through their creative practice. And if you're obsessing about getting it right, you're going to drift further and further away from that flow state. And you'll just end up creating art that maybe looks good or sounds good, but it feels hollow to you. The process itself is going to start feeling like a torture. And I think people can really feel that when they're looking at your art or they're hearing you perform. And this is something that I've experienced. You know, being in music school, I was taught these are the right ways to make music. And as the years go by, I became tighter and tighter. I lost my true connection with music, which is really about expressing myself. So much of the societal programming we receive is antithetical to making art that feels really true to our humanity. We're told to be efficient. We're told to produce a lot. We're told to essentially behave like machines, which is why we even have this cultural discussion right now about artificial intelligence replacing humans. I mean, when you think about it, art really comes from our humanity. True artistry can only happen when the human part of us meets the divine part of us. It's so ridiculous to even believe that true art can be replaced by machines. But because we believe we've fallen into this illusion that art making is about the product and its value is determined by how much the product is worth in the marketplace, we mistake the output of LLMs as substitutes for true creation. It's true that ChatGPT or Claude can summarize, they can synthesize, they can even extrapolate, they can mimic what humans have created. But true soul level movement that comes from art requires actual engagement. If you've ever heard someone who is a true master of singing, the kind of singing that really touches your heart, it's never about the song. It's never even about the voice itself. It's not about whether they hit all the right notes. It's about the way that all of that service level things harmonize what's within. It's about how all the years of dedicating themselves to the craft, but also to cultivating a relationship with their inner artistry, how all of that is transferred over to the audience. The other day, I went to this Martha Graham exhibit here in New York City, and some of you may know Martha Graham, who is an incredible dancer and a true artist and this beautiful choreographer. And it was astonishing to witness how moving her dancing is. And it's not just her, it's like her entire company, the people who were trained by her, who were dancing alongside her. It almost was like they all were in this bubble that they created through their devotion to art, right? It's not about being a virtuosic dancer who does crazy things with their bodies, even though that was a part of it too. It wasn't about having a bunch of dancers who are all doing the same thing with perfect timing on stage. It's really about how do you become the bridge? How do you, in your humanity, become the bridge to the divine wanting to move itself through you? You can see how their expressions, their life force move through their body, their face, the way that they slightly lift their chin or the way that they move their hips. And so I think right now, this moment we're living in is such a perfect moment in our evolution as a species to really look at our relationship to creativity, to really start shifting the way we relate to our creative spirit. Our creative spirit is hoping for us to come home, to remember that we ourselves are living, moving, breathing art. And in order to come back to that, we have to begin by examining our relationship with our creative practice. So let me briefly share a little bit about the format of this offering, because this is a very specific offering and it has a very specific format that also carries its own intelligence to it. So it's a 9-week offering and it's divided into 2 phases. The first phase is initiation. So during the first 21 days, you'll be receiving daily audio and written prompts for reflection. And I'll also make sure to include short audio teachings in there too. So you're not just filling out a bunch of prompts, right? You also know why we're doing it. And these prompts are quite brief. They should be able to, by most people, be completed under 15 minutes. And of course, You're always welcome to spend more time if there's a prompt you find interesting, right? And the reason why we do this is because first, within the first 21 days, we want to get you into the habit of creating space to show up daily to your creative practice. I know that many creative mystics are already familiar with practices like the morning pages, right? Or maybe you pull tarot cards every morning. So you know how to make time for yourself. But what we want to do in the first 21 days is to really turn your attention, to focus your attention and your energy and your mind, your spirit, your emotions fully into your creative practice, and to start investigating what is happening. What are some of your own patterns around making art, around thinking about creativity, talking about creativity, seeing yourself as a creative being, and understanding what is happening there underneath the hood, right? Because I know I've spoken to many of you over the years, and you spoke to me, okay, about procrastination. It's hard for you to stay consistent. You have a hard time being a creative within capitalist structures. I get all of that, right? But it's important for you to get even more specific. It's important for you to understand exactly what is the moment where you basically abandon your art making. What happens there? And once you start identifying that, you can start working with it. You want to begin the process of paying closer attention to what happens when you turn towards your creativity. So during the first 21 days, you're mostly asked to reflect on your inner state of being, your thoughts, your emotions, your overall energy. And the reason why we start here, as I mentioned before, is that your state of being is as important, if not more important, than your doing. This is true in all areas of life, but especially with your creativity. Your creative work is a transmission. So when someone interacts with something you created, they're not just receiving it on a mundane, tangible level. This more energetic part of them, you can even maybe call it their soul, right, is impacted and stirred by the energetic imprint encoded into the work, which is something that you weave with every state of your being at every step of the way, right? This is a point or a way of approaching art making that is really dissolving the boundaries between being human, being a mystic, and being a creative. And all of that gets to weave together. So your state of being will impact your ability to show up consistently. It will impact your ability to show up sustainably to your creative practice. If you are a creative mystic who is doing your morning pages every day, but somehow you're not making your art every day, there's a disconnect there. And you know this, right? It's why is it that it's hard for you to show up to your creative practice, but you could journal? Something is not connecting. So what we want to do in the first 21 days is to start building the bridge, is to start repatterning, right? And 21 days in a lot of studies, modern neuroscience studies, this is the minimum amount of time that is needed to interrupt old patterns. So we want to work with that, right? And in order for us to create a more structural rewiring, in order for us to actually rebirth our inner creative beast, as I would call it, we need a longer process. So this is where phase 2 comes in, right? So during phase 2, for 40 days, you'll be choosing a creative practice. You're going to decide the parameters of your practice and you'll practice it for 40 days. And those of you who have done sadhana practice, or maybe you've done other kinds of practice that are culturally grounded, you might have noticed that a lot of these practices take 40 days, right? And so I choose that consciously because there is kind of a mystical element to the 40-day framework, the 40-day container, right? And I'll share more if you decide to join the experience, to join the course. But you can start thinking, if this is resonating with you, what practice might you want to take up? And over the second phase, which is that 40-day, you will still receive daily prompts, but rather than exploring new territories, I'll be inviting you to return to some of the prompts from phase one, as well as the responses that you created. You'll have the chance to contemplate those questions again from a different point in time, different point in your journey, and you'll notice things that you maybe missed the first time. And this act of returning inevitably will help you deepen that self awareness around how you orient your creativity. I also want you to turn towards your responses from the first 21 days and really use it as inspiration for your creative practice. Something that I've learned from training and mentoring intuitives and people who are oracular in their nature is that there's a habit of turning away from our own knowing. There's a habit of turning away from our sight or the messages that we received, right? And so it's very important to learn to turn towards it, because all of life as a creative mystic is your source material, right? All of life is fair game. You can turn anything into works of art. And imagine who you would be if you walk around life with this approach, with this orientation, right? Imagine how much richer your experiences will be when you're not trying to avoid anything. You don't have to avoid any experience in life because anything can be turned into art. How incredible is that? And during the second phase, I'll also be releasing 12 shorter teachings. So it's not dissimilar to this podcast. It will be a little shorter so that it will be something that you can actually digest throughout your process. And they're really meant to support you, they're meant to inspire you, to accompany you, to provoke you on this journey. So the entire course is going to be delivered on a platform called Teachable, and I'm calling it an independent study program. And what I mean by that is every day, one lesson will be unlocked in the course portal, and you'll be able to share your experience with that daily lesson in the comment section. So everybody who's taking the class will be able to see each other's comments. And obviously, this is optional. You don't have to share if you don't want to, but you will have community support. It's just going to be asynchronous. We're not all going to sit on Zoom all together. And instead, we're just going to be kind of looking at and coalescing around the materials that are delivered daily, and we'll do our individual work and we can report back to the group. And every 7 days, I'll be soliciting questions so you can receive my support with your creative practice. I'll be recording my answers for everybody's questions, and everyone will be able to benefit from the questions that are shared. So it is an independent practice, but you're not alone, because I'm really there every step of the way. If you choose to listen to the audio version of the daily lessons, you'll hear my voice constantly. It's like I'm sitting right there next to you, right? So you're not going to feel alone, but it does require you to want to commit to doing something like this, and I think this is important. The reason why I chose this specific format rather than maybe, a weekly meetup where we talk about our creative practice, right, is because I found that a lot of the times when I'm in these creative containers where there's a lot of live components, where we sit together, where we share experiences, I found that doesn't always work super well for me personally, because I think that a huge aspect of being a creative is learning how to work independently. You do have to establish self-trust in your own rhythm. You need to be able to trust yourself to show up consistently. You need to be able to get to your studio. You need to be able to get to your empty page. You need to be able to get to your creative practice. And I don't want to create yet another excuse for you not to do this, right? Because, you having spent an hour with all of us on Zoom is actually taking away from your creative practice, And so what I want is for you to be able to focus on your creative practice, and to be able to receive the benefit of the materials that I've prepared for you and this framework that I've created, even when you're traveling, even when you're in a place with limited internet connection. And I truly believe that this course and its format will assist you in accessing that willpower and applying it to your creative practice, which is the perfect place to bring your willpower into. So, this offering will be super potent for those of you who really want to build a creative practice. And your creative practice, again, can be anything really. This framework works as long as you're willing to, one, commit to your own creative journey by committing to a regular practice of reflecting on your creativity as well as actually doing your creative practice. And then number two, it will work if you're willing to look at your own internal patterns around creativity, which I'm imagining if you're listening to this, you are. So, if this resonates with you and if this feels like a really powerful, delicious way to spend your summer, I invite you to consider joining us. As I mentioned, early bird rate is available until Monday, June 29th at the end of the day. And the only way you can access that is by joining the waitlist, where you'll be receiving the discount code. And then registration will be open for another week after the early bird closes. And on Monday, July 6th, we will begin. So I encourage you to check out Creative Exorcism if all of this sounds exciting, if it sounds like exactly the kind of work you want to be doing. I would love to see you in it. And I would be so privileged to be a part of your creative, mystical exploration. All right. Thank you so much for listening to this. I'm sending you so much love, and I hope to gather again with you very soon. Take care.